Hello, everybody. I'm Parrish Alford of the Daily Journal, joined by Logan Lowry, our Mississippi State beat writer. We are talking SEC football. John Pitts has had some sports editor things come up, he says. He'll rejoin us next week. Um, kind of thinking that he just wanted to take off a week of games that included Presbyterian and Tennessee Martin. Logan, I wouldn't mind taking off a week either, but we're gonna push through, man. We're gonna play hurt, and we're gonna, as the players so often say, we're gonna suck it up and push through.
Exactly. At least you still have that one bye weekend to kind of play with. All of mine are used up, and I'm kind of in it for the long haul. I'm down the stretch. It's football, 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 and this week we throw in some basketball into the mix. So we'll have that throughout the remainder as well.
Yeah, the Rebels do have a bye week. That's next week, and that'll come in handy in advance of a road trip to Arkansas. It's Presbyterian this week. Next week, Logan, for that bye, I'm actually going to be out of town on Friday. I'm going to go watch some directional football, as I call it, in Louisiana at the university formerly known as Northeast Louisiana, a little impromptu gathering of some old friends there. And so I'll watch the Indian Warhawks play football for the first time in Monroe since 1995. I think I was there for a 10-year homecoming, or I guess that would have been about a 7-year homecoming. But anyway, I'll go watch the Indian Warhawks a little bit. Might see, well, no, I won't say I'll see the same level of play this week. I would say that ULM would be a little bit better than Presbyterian. I know you've got the University of Tennessee coming in. Dylan Favre's kind of been a big storyline with that, huh?
Yeah, he has, and it's really not as big of a storyline as you might would think. Just the fact that he's not the starter. I mean, head coach Jason Simpson said that he thinks that Favre will play in this game, and he's going to try to use him. And why not? I mean, you might as well throw the kitchen sink out there. It's the first time UT Martin has ever played the #1 team in the country. They've never beaten an SEC school. They're 0-4 in that regard. So throw everything at Mississippi State. Try to just catch things on. Hopefully catch things on the right way, and score some points. And who knows? After seeing the Appalachian State Michigan game that a few years ago, anything can happen in college football. So you can't just roll the ball out there and expect to win. I mean, Mississippi State should win this game soundly. But if you're UT Martin, why not put Dylan Favre out there? He was a heck of a talent. I covered him in high school, and his first 2 years here at Mississippi State. He's a lot like his uncle. Kind of that gunslinger mentality. A lot of excitement when he's on the field. And Dan Mullen described it perfectly this week. He said, when he's out on the field, something's going to happen. It might be good, it might be bad, but something's going to happen when that kid's on the field, and that's the truth. Watching him in some of those scrimmages, he plays a lot like his uncle. It's kind of a mix between Brett Favre and Johnny Manziel, the way that he plays, and he's kind of reckless with the football, which is why you kind of probably see some of the marks not so high on him, and the fact that he's only about 5'9", is probably the knocks on him. But everything else is a legit quarterback.
Well, if he's a little reckless, a little bit of a gunslinger, that is kind of resembles his uncle, as you say. I remember covering his uncle, Brett Favre, his last 2 years at Southern Miss. There, I covered those seasons, and look, the gunslinger mentality, the recklessness, the can-do attitude. I mean, all of that was what Brett Favre was about at all levels of football. I mean, you saw that in his NFL career too.
Exactly. And Dylan Favre, I mean, he's got just about every passing record in the state of Mississippi in the high school ranks, so he's more than capable of having a big game. Now, how much we'll see him on Saturday, I don't know, but I expect you'll see him quite a bit, and it'd be neat to see what the reaction is, because he was one of those guys that was talked about quite a bit by fans. Excited for him to see what he can do in his future. It didn't work out for him here at Mississippi State. Transferred down to Pearl River, played 1 year there, and ended up at UT Martin. And another storyline is Jason Simpson, the head coach at UT Martin, was a former baseball player and a former quarterback here at Mississippi State. So he played a couple years here. I think 90 through 92 he was here in Starkville, and then he transferred to Southern Miss and ended his career there. So kind of a few little storylines here.
Well, and talking about reckless and gunslinger and just kind of an aggressive nature, hey, those things have kind of summed up Bo Wallace. And the most recent example of that was throwing downfield against LSU and trying to win the game. You don't fault the guy for trying to win the game, but that wasn't the play that was called. He thought he could make that throw, though, and it turned out to be an interception. Wallace had a crucial fumble against Auburn as well, down close to the goal line. But look, by and large, this has been a guy who has really protected the football in SEC play. I mean, those 2 turnovers are very high profile and very visible, and have come in scoring opportunities and late in the game. But by and large, he's been a guy who has protected the football in SEC play. Didn't start out that way against Boise State in the opener. He kind of had a setback in ball protection against Memphis. But Wallace, through his career, Logan has had those same traits. Man, he feels like he can make plays. Sometimes that confidence has directed him into some questionable throws, but he's gotten better in that regard. And we've talked about that here before. Ole Miss needed that from Bo Wallace when he got to the program in 2012, and they've needed it less as it's gone on. Now, what I think needs to happen for Bo Wallace this week against Presbyterian, and this would be the perfect plan for Ole Miss, is he's out of the game after 2.5 quarters with about a 21-0 lead, and then you hand it off to reserves, and you get as many reps and game time snaps as you can for those backup quarterbacks, Devontae Kincaid and Ryan Buchanan. You let them run the offense a little bit. This is that kind of game, Logan, for State as well, that you can win it. Of course, you want to win it, but you want to play well. You want to execute. You don't want to leave a game like this, with the feeling that you played sloppily, that you had turnovers, that you let an inferior opponent hang around longer than they needed to. And that's not what either of these teams want to do. So Ole Miss would like to get Wallace out of the game early. Hopefully, by the time the second half rolls around, they're handing off to a lot of different running backs and establishing a run game that they haven't been able to do with consistency this year. And they're running some clock, and we're able to take full advantage of a rare 11 o'clock start for Ole Miss because goodness knows I haven't seen many of those the last 2 years.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. Like you said, it's the same story for Mississippi State. And in fact, with Dak Prescott's foot, ankle, whatever it is, he wasn't wearing a boot this week when we talked to him, but that was kind of the major storyline heading into last week. But, they need to – I don't even know that you even need to play Dak Prescott. You need to dress him out, have him available. But you shouldn't need Dak Prescott to beat UT Martin. And if you do, you probably don't deserve to be the number 1 team in the country. But I do think that Dak will probably start the game, probably play a few series. I wouldn't play him any more than 3 series. Hopefully by then Mississippi State has taken enough lead to where they can pull him out of the game, because you don't want him to aggravate that injury, because that's just one of those things that he could turn it, he could twist it. Somebody could fall on it wrong, and the next thing you know, he's on the sideline on crutches for the Alabama game. So you've got to have him as healthy as possible heading into that big SEC matchup in Tuscaloosa. But and the same could be said for a lot of players on Mississippi State's team. You build an early lead, empty the benches, get a lot of guys some playing time, build that confidence up, because like you said, you don't want to leave this game with having an inferior opponent, take you down to the wire. And you don't want to play down to their level. Go out there and handle your business and gain as much confidence as you can, because you've got that huge matchup against Alabama in Tuscaloosa kind of looming in the horizon, and you want to be clicking on all cylinders when you head to Bryant-Denny.
Logan, people have talked about that upcoming game for a long time, this matchup with State and Alabama. How do you feel like the Bulldogs are playing heading into that game? I know they're number 1. How are they playing, and how do you think they match up?
Well, they've improved in some areas where we had some concerns earlier in the year. We talked about how their secondary was vulnerable. They've actually shored up that secondary a little bit, and I've really seen a big improvement from guys like Will Redmond, who made the game-winning interception last week. He's playing at a whole new level. Jamerson Love's playing outstanding out there at corner. So just the improved play by those 2 guys has kind of lifted that secondary as a whole. there's some areas where they're not playing very good. Dak Prescott's thrown 5 interceptions in the last 3 games. That's very uncharacteristic of him, and a lot of them were bad interceptions. Both interceptions he threw last week against Arkansas were terrible interceptions. It put Mississippi State kind of behind the 8 ball in that first half. I mean, they dug themselves a 10-0 deficit that they had to kind of pull back for them. And they did score 17 unanswered points to win that game, but they're trailing at halftime. And I do think that that's a situation that could help Mississippi State later on down the line with these games against Ole Miss and Alabama coming up, and even into the postseason. But Mississippi State hadn't faced a whole lot of adversity this year, and they were able to overcome a little bit last week. So I think that helped them a little bit. But they're still not playing clean. There's still some areas that they need to work on. Penalties was another huge thing last week. They had 8 penalties. That's the most that they've had all year. So definitely don't need to hurt yourselves in those situations. A lot of those were pre-snap penalties and post-snap penalties with some personal fouls.
Well, Ole Miss has faced some adversity, a lot of injuries, and that was before the season-ending injury to Laquan Treadwell against Auburn when he was really just inches from breaking the plane and giving Ole Miss what probably would have been a winning touchdown. Still some time on the clock, and the lead would only have been 3, but you sure would rather be up by 3 with 1:30 left than down by 4 and giving the ball back after a turnover, which is what happened. I don't fault Laquan Treadwell on that fumble, Logan. I think when your leg is broken in 2 different places, and you got the ankle, you got the fibula, you got all that going on, and the pain just shooting through your leg, I can see dropping the football, okay? I understand that. Bo Wallace has to protect the ball better when he's down there. I don't know that Ole Miss, I don't know that you could call that a game-winning touchdown had he scored. It still would have been about 5 or 6 minutes left in the game. Plenty of time, for that Auburn offense, but a tremendous missed opportunity with that turnover for Ole Miss in that game. But so many injuries. Right now, if the Rebels were playing this week, they could potentially be without 5 starters. They lost Denzel Kimdichie early in the LSU game. They lost Laramie Tunsil. During that game, he didn't play against Auburn. He'll probably sit it out. He should sit it out this week against Presbyterian. You have those 2 guys. You have Itavius Mathers, the running back, Trey Elston at safety, who will, in all likelihood, sit this out with concussions. So, and of course Treadwell. So just a lot of injuries and key players. When you're seeing guys from that 2013 recruiting class go down, guys that they have really relied upon heavily. Then you have others who are playing at less than full strength, like Cody Pruitt and Robert Kimdichie. As Ron Polk would say, that's football, or maybe that's a version of that quote. Excuse me. But a lot of injuries right now for Ole Miss. This FCS game really comes at a good time, and then followed by an open date. If all goes according to plan, they should be able to rest a lot of people against Presbyterian and then go into an open date and really go to Arkansas a little bit healthier and with a plan to stop the run, because that has been an Achilles heel for them the last 2 weeks. LSU really pounded it between the tackles and hurt Ole Miss for all of the first half. Then the Rebels made some adjustments after halftime, but by the time that last drive came around, LSU was 95 yards away, but they put in a fresh tailback because they have so many of those against an Ole Miss defense that had been on the field for a long time and just drove it down and scored. Auburn hurt Ole Miss with a lot of I think the Rebels got caught up in the motion before the snap. I think that hurt them with some alignment and some fits. But bottom line is teams have run on Ole Miss the last 2 weeks, and the only SEC teams left on their schedule are going to have very good power running offenses, and Ole Miss needs to improve in that area. So I think this week against an FCS team in Presbyterian that will try to run the ball will kind of give them a little warm up in that regard, and then an open date to heal and plan going into Arkansas. This Presbyterian game comes at a good time.
Yeah, and Mississippi State actually has a couple of opportune games. Like I said, we talked about the big game with Alabama. We talked about the big game with Ole Miss to end the year. But look at what Mississippi State has prior to that. They don't have an open date. but they almost might as well be. I mean, they've got UT Martin this week, and they've got Vanderbilt before the Egg Bowl. So not the toughest opponents that they could face going into that game. And, health-wise for Mississippi State, we've talked about Dak Prescott already. The only other injuries, Jamion Lewis is played in the last 2 games, but very, very sparingly. They've thrown to him twice. He's caught one of those for 2 yards. That's, the leading receiver in the SEC coming back this year. And I don't think you'll see much of him this week. His leg injury continues to bother him. I think they'll try to rest him this week, give him another week to heal up, and hopefully have him back at full strength for that Alabama game. The only other injury that I know of, Dan Mullen's not really very open about injuries, but
send Brad Locke down there to ask about injuries.
Exactly, yeah. Brad and Brandon and Marcelo, we need to get both of those together. They seem like when they tag team on Dan about injuries, bad things happen. But anyway. Zach Jackson missed last week's game with an injury. They actually had to burn a red shirt on J.T. Gray in that. With Zach Jackson's injury, J.T. Gray came in on the kickoff team and actually ended up with 3 tackles on kickoffs. So that's pretty good there for the freshman playing in the first game. He actually made the tackle on the opening kickoff of his very first college football game. I thought that was pretty cool. But those are the only other 2 injuries outside of Dak Prescott that I know about.
Hey, let's shift gears a little bit, Logan, and get off of football and into the administration a little bit, if you will. Did you see the twinner back and forth between Ross Bjork and the Mississippi State fan this week that resulted in a wrestling championship belt on Bjork's shoulder in a Twitter photo?
I did, and I'm a big, huge wrestling fan, Parrish, and I recognized that was the TNA World Championship belt.
You're way out in front on me now. If you can start identifying wrestling belts, you're ahead of me. Go ahead.
Exactly, and actually TNA Wrestling is owned by a former Ole Miss alum, Dixie Carter.
Well, again,
I just blew away with that, didn't I?
Yeah, you're way out in front with the wrestling trivia there. What do State fans make of, obviously this guy got into it with Bjork, but, Ole Miss fans now, they like the fact, or I sense that they like that Ross Bjork stands up for them on Twitter, that he's not afraid to do things like write a letter to the editor chastising the Opelika Auburn News for its use of a fairly gruesome picture of the. I mean, Ross Bjork is a guy who in social media will really, go to bat for, his programs and players and athletes when he believes they're in the right, which is, obviously, he believes that most of the time. But it's interesting to watch this fan interaction. Was there any kind of Mississippi State reaction to that?
I've heard from a few fans that they were, of course, didn't like the way that he was combative with the reaction, but you have to kind of give the guy some credit for standing up for his team and kind of what he believes in. I don't know if he did it the right way, with wanting to meet somebody face to face, or I don't know how tongue in cheek that actually was. I've never met Ross Bjork, so I really don't know him personally to form an opinion one way or the other. But I can tell you that I don't see Scott Strickland taking that approach. He's kind of Scott's one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. Very, very personable. And Scott, does get irritated at some things. He got irritated, with some Mississippi State fans ringing their cowbells, when they weren't supposed to, and wrote a letter. But he kind of tactfully did that. He told them, kind of chastise them, but not very harsh or in an abusive or abrupt way. So that's really all I can say on that. Since I don't really know Ross or have any dealings with him. I mean, but coming from Scott Strickland, if he would have done something like that, I would have been very surprised.
Well, I'll tell you what, I do think the meet me in a dark alley or in a wrestling match was probably tongue in cheek. But we have seen Ross Bjork. He's not afraid to get on social media and take up for his coaches and players. We've seen that before in responses to allegations of recruiting impropriety. Also after the Auburn game, there was the comment from the Rivals publisher of the OrangeBloods.com site that resulted in his suspension. We saw a Ross Bjork reaction, to his comment on Twitter. So anyway, I think Scott Strickland is aggressive in his own way, and that's marketing. You see things like the picture on Twitter of Scott Strickland, with the Egg Bowl trophy strapped in, carefully driving it around. You know what I'm saying? Things like that. I know that media relations is in Scott's background. Obviously, you see a lot of marketing from him. We've seen things at State like the Hail State hashtags in the end zone, I think, that had to be removed. Did they not?
They did. You can have Hell State, but as long as you don't put that hashtag in front of it, and that's what they've done in that end zone down there. It's actually Hell State now, but just they lost the hashtag when they had to.
Yeah, you just got to use your own imagination there and think that a hashtag might fit with that, huh?
Right, exactly. And can't have Hell State on the back of the uniforms either. That's another thing we've learned. We learned that, I guess, in that first Vanderbilt game when they had to get the anchor down approved, and they tried to throw the penalty on them, and then they took the penalty back, and Mississippi State actually we're supposed to have Hail State on the back of actually on the front of their jerseys for those 90 retro throwback jerseys that they've been wearing for a majority of this season. They actually had Hail State across the front, and they actually had to go get them remade because they couldn't have that on there any longer.
Hey, folks, we're going to shift gears a little bit. It's talking SEC football here, but we're going to talk a little basketball too. The exhibition season is getting underway. I know, Logan, I think State is tonight with Delta State. Is that right? And then Delta State's in Oxford tomorrow night.
That is correct. So we'll get things tipped off here, and then I'll send it up to you tomorrow night.
Well, that sounds good. I know it's there's a lot of new around Ole Miss basketball right now, a lot of new transfers coming in. And, with all of that turnover and roster change, I mean, this is still a team that lost Marshall Henderson but was picked sixth in the SEC by league coaches. I mean, there are some interesting pieces and parts here. I'm looking forward to seeing them in action. A lot of talk about Stephon Moody. They list him at 5'10". I'm told he's a little bit shorter than that, but Andy Kennedy calls him as explosive a player as he's had in the Ole Miss basketball program as anyone else. So the guy can score, or that's been his MO. This will be a different level for him. He was at Florida Atlantic, then junior college, but they love his athleticism, and he's played well in the preseason. A lot of other transfers to watch for Ole Miss. The post-grad guys, they've got degrees in hand, and that would be Terrence Smith from Tennessee Martin. He was among the top three-point shooters in the OVC last year. He's a career 1,000-point scorer at UT Martin. He may help fill that void. Marshall Henderson was not, Andy Kennedy constantly referred to him as a volume three-point shooter. He's pretty good with percentage, and he could get hot. I think you're going to see a higher percentage out of Terrence Smith. MJ Rhett has come in to help with rebounding. He comes from Tennessee State, another post-grad guy. So he's a little bit more of a physical makeup that the Rebels were lacking last year. They had big guys who were a little bit tentative in Dwight Colby and Sebastian Saiz as freshmen. You got a guy coming in Rhett who is more along the lines of Murphy Holloway, Reggie Buckner, that physical presence that helped Ole Miss to the NCAA tournament along with Henderson in 2013. So a lot of newness to keep an eye on with Ole Miss basketball. Logan, what are you seeing with Rick Ray's team?
Well, obviously there was plenty of newness over here in Starkville too. The last couple of years for Rick Ray, the first 2 years for him actually, he's been playing with 6 and 7 players every game, and you just cannot compete night in and night out in the SEC with that type of numbers. I mean, they had talent. They just didn't have enough talent. When you're getting guys, logging 35 minutes to 40 minutes a game, it takes its toll as the season progresses. And, I haven't seen Rick Ray any happier than talking to him over the summer. And he's talking about having 13 players on the roster and just having a full guy and a bench to actually go to during some games. Now, that bench has actually taken some hits already in fall camp. He lost Craig Swart already for 4 to 6 weeks. Actually, I.J. Reddy had the same injury. They both had a bulging disc in their back, and they both had surgery on that. Craig Sword is expected back by about the second game of the regular season, and I.J. Reddy is expected back about mid-December. Johnny Zapata, who's a JUCO transfer coming in, he's already lost for the year. He had tore up his knee, going to miss the entire season. I do know a couple of guys that he's excited about, some of those newcomers, is Travis Daniel and Demetrius Houston out there on the wing. How good are they on the wing? Well, they've moved Fred Thomas from the wing to shooting guard, and he's actually going to have to play some backup point guard now that with a couple of injuries there at the point guard spot. But he's really excited about the athleticism of both Daniels and Demetrius Houston, and then they'll get some size down low as well. They signed a guy in Oliver Black to help Gavin Ware down the post, and they actually got Falou Ndoye, who's 6'11", eligible. He was on the team last year, but could not play due to NCAA, regulations or whatever. But he's available this year. He'll see the floor for the first time, and they finally got some size down low to kind of help Gavin Ware, who's kind of been Mississippi State's only big man the last 2 years. So I'm excited to see how these new parts and pieces work with this team, and kind of. I think this year you'll finally get to see what Rick Ray basketball is all about. He talked about when he first arrived playing 94 feet on defense, being very aggressive and full court pressures and all that stuff, but he hasn't been able to do that because he just hasn't had the numbers to go out there. I mean, you can't play 6 or 7 guys during a ball game and expect them to play that type of minutes and that type of pressure for 40 minutes a game. It's just impossible to do. And I think this year he'll be able to do that a little bit more, and I think we'll kind of start to put a finger on what Rick Ray basketball is all about.
Well, I visited with Rick Ray a little bit when I was covering the SEC business meetings in Destin in the spring. I asked him if he thought about hiring Marshall Henderson there as a graduate assistant. He didn't think that was a good idea, Logan.
Probably not. I think those two clashed about something. I'm not sure exactly what that was. It's probably a lot of. I know one word that was said, a couple of words that were said actually that we can't repeat on this podcast or this webcast.
Or we'll be apologizing also.
Exactly.
Hey, folks, that's it for this edition of Talking SEC Football. We'll be back here next Thursday live again. Come and join us.